Okay, good morning everyone, and welcome to our webinar this morning. Hopefully you're having beautiful weather wherever you are. I have to admit we're having an outrageous storm here in Brisbane this morning, so if you hear thunder and lightning going crazy in the background, I'll try to keep it down for you. So we're joined this morning with Frans Vermeulen and Linda Johnston. Really lucky to have them here doing a second webinar with us. Quite a few people participated in the webinar with Frans and Linda a couple of weeks ago, talking about the work they've been doing with the plant family of medicines and a forthcoming book which is due out on the horizon very shortly. And of course Frans and Linda will be doing a seminar in Australia and New Zealand in the coming couple of weeks, so I thought it was a very good chance to speak to them again and hear some more details about all the work they've been doing and ask them some questions. So what I'd encourage you today, during the webinar you'll have opportunities to ask questions, and you'll see on the right hand side of your screen there's a questions box you can type into. So if there is something that you'd like to ask Frans and Linda, please do type it in there and we'll get to as many questions as we can during the webinar as possible. So I'd just like to start by saying hello to Frans and Linda and welcome to the webinar this morning. How are you?
We're fine, thank you.
Good day, mates.
We've just been having a chat before the webinar started. Frans has been practicing both his Australian and his New Zealand accents. He's doing very well.
I can't sing like Slim Dusty.
There might be a few people may say Slim Dusty can't sing either.
Oh, right. Oh, well, that's Lazy Harry then, perhaps.
Okay. So we might make a start. So let's make a start. Perhaps if we could start by just having a chat about all the things that are on the horizon at the moment. There's a couple of projects that you have coming up in Australia. I know we have a seminar with you, Frans and Linda, in a couple of weeks' time, the weekend, October 28th, 29th and 30th in Byron Bay, which will be a gorgeous chance to talk about plants in one of the scenic, gorgeous green corners of the country. And the New Zealand seminar, when is the New Zealand seminar?
A week later.
A week later, we're talking November 4th, 5th, and 6th.
Okay. Yeah, lovely.
Auckland.
Have you been?
We get an opportunity to spend some time in both your countries in the middle 5 days of that, so we're looking forward to that.
Yeah.
I've been to Australia, although not New Zealand.
Yeah, I've been in both. Sheep country, if I may call it like that. Sorry, it's not meant as an offense or to offend anyone, but that's what I saw most in New Zealand, so many sheep.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, we have some ongoing jokes between Australia and New Zealand about our sheep and our kangaroos, so I won't share them with you today. Maybe later I'll tell you them.
Yeah, because we're doing plants, not animals, so you have to save that for our animal webinar.
True.
But we're actually very excited because this will be 2 seminars that we get to elaborate on a lot of what we've been doing with our plant families. I think we mentioned last time about the book on plants. It's literally at the presses as we speak. So in the next 3 to 4 weeks it should be available. And we've one of the most exciting things is to see the immense variety in the plant kingdom. Not just variety among the individual remedies, but when we look at the 139 plant families or groupings that we looked into, each one has its own distinctly unique themes and addresses specific problems. So as opposed to the plant families we know so well, like the Solanaceae or the Compositae, where we're very familiar with the distinct outlines of their characteristics. We could say that that's true of every single other plant family. So instead of having a crayon box with 6 basic colors of green, blue, red, and yellow, and so forth, we have 139, and each color is a distinct shade from any other and can't be replaced with any other family. So that opened our eyes and was an exciting discovery to see the distinction between each family.
So perhaps you could elaborate a little on that, Frans and Linda, in terms of how you came to understand the difference, how you came to see the patterns in each of the individual families.
It all starts in the past. We first have to understand how the materia medica is constructed. And we do that by looking at what the old guys, where they got their information from. They got their information from medical journals in their days, and from there they collected their cases, and their cases they were built on what they knew about certain plant remedies, which usually were provings, but also sometimes intoxications and poisonings. We have believed over the last year that we are rather creating something new with our family ideas, but actually that's not true. The idea of the families has always been there, only we didn't know that from the beginning it always has been families. It has been generic what they were speaking about. They were not speaking about species specifically. They were speaking about groupings. So if we understand that it started in the beginning, not with the idea of creating groupings or families, but it just went that way because they didn't specify specifically, precisely enough to speak about species. If we understand that, then we can take that as a starting point and from there start filling in. Instead of what we do now, we believe now that the large remedies are the species best explored. This is not completely the case. The case is that the large remedies as we have them are the representative full out of the group. If we understand that, we understand that belladonna represents the family to which it belongs as much as it represents itself as a species. So by then we can fill in if we know any other species, maybe a local one, as you have two that belong to the family, the nightshade family in Australia. One I've tried to practice the pronunciation, Pichuri, and the other one is called the corkwood tree. Both of them are in the genus Duboisia. The first one, this Pichuri, is very similar to nicotine, to the tobacco plant. It contains the same chemicals. The other one has a few lines in Börke, and there it says it dilates the pupil, dries the mouth, checks perspiration, causes headache and drowsiness. On the eyes it acts more promptly than atropine. Why does it act more promptly than atropine? Because it contains a very atropine type of alkaloid which has similar effects than belladonna atropine. Now, by knowing that, we can just as well use the Australian corkwood tree for the same symptoms as we use belladonna now so generally. Now, by doing that, we expand our horizon, we enlarge our materia medica, and we enlarge the possibilities that we have in prescribing, instead of now trying to teach ourselves a number of so-called polycrests and believe that that's what we need to know, and that's it.
Mm-hmm.
So we started with that idea and looked at these, taking a whole family, looking at the most famous or most well-known members, and seeing what were the commonalities, and then also looking at other family members that were very little known, just as the example Frans gave. And that gave us an ability to follow a thread through and say, wait, if this shows up in several members in this family, then these qualities are family specific and not individual member specific. So that's how it started, and it grew from there. And it really is quite fruitful looking at the individual proving symptoms and finding that these same ideas show up in the proving symptoms. These ideas weren't just plucked out of the air. All of the themes and affinities and that we've come up with have a firm basis in either the phytochemicals, the natural botany of the plant, or the provings or cases, so that our feet are firmly planted on the ground. You know, sometimes the idea of these newfangled ideas, or so-called newfangled ideas about plant families, are looked at with skepticism, but everything is really firmly planted, I can say that, on the ground, and we aren't really going off in some speculative place.
The error that we make is to believe that the only reliable remedies in the plant families, and any other family for that matter, are those that have received the proving, and these are usually the so-called polycrest. But we need to realize that these symptoms come from somewhere. They are caused by something. And if we understand by which they are caused, if we can find something that contains the same or a similar chemical composition as the ones of which we know what they cause, we can draw our own conclusions. We don't need more provings then. It's simple. There can hardly be any difference. And differences will be very small, and we are allowed to find these differences out in the clinic.
So one of the ways I think to get this point across is looking at human families. You have the Smith family and the Jones family, and if you address a letter to a Smith, anybody in that whole household could have received that letter. So that's the generic, that's the general. And you could say there's certain characteristics that apply to every Smith. But then you have Joe Smith and Jane Smith and Sarah Smith and David Smith, and each of those individual, that's species. Then you have the family characteristics, but then you apply the individual characteristics of that person. That's the same thing that applies to the plant. There's a family idea, and then there's individual members that carry the family idea with them and modify it to their own individual characteristics. But they are connected to the family idea. So the advantage to thinking in these terms when you're prescribing is that instead of 2,000 possibilities or more in front of you, you can limit this. Say, I have 138 different possible families here, and by making the first cut at that level, it helps direct you more accurately and more precisely to the specific remedy. We'd like to maybe give you an example of this. We did one last time rather briefly, and we'd like to elaborate on that, just to show you how this process works and how we are able to see the phytochemicals, the botany, the provings, the clinical cases, and distill out of that vast array of information what the themes and affinities are.
Yeah, that would be fantastic.
I would like to give two more examples to show how the materia medica has grown over the years and what we can do to keep on enlarging it. If you would look in Allen's handbook, T.F. Allen's handbook, on the one of the snakes, I forgot which one, that says all snakes affect the blood. Okay? And elsewhere, either I believe it's in Burke, but it might also be in the handbook of Allen, it says all spiders affect the nervous system. That was based on the knowledge of these days. Now we know this is not correct. But there, on this premise, their materia medica extensions were built. So we should not be surprised to find that the second snake that was introduced, which was Crotalus cascavella, was based on the idea that all snakes affected the blood. So it was used in cases of menstruation difficulties and irregularities, which is incorrect because it is not a hemotoxic snake, so it does not affect the blood. But this is an example how general science and other sciences, biology and pharmacology, etc., help to specify our materia medica so that we can make groupings which are correct instead of based on observations based on a premise which is incorrect, like all spiders affect the nervous system. We know now this is not the case. But in these days, there was no evidence to the contrary. So it was believed this was the case. They had tarantula, they had Aranea, and they had some nervous system symptoms, and the conclusion was based on, as we know now, insufficient material, but in these days that was what it was. So it is with the plant families. The plant families now are much sharper defined and much preciser delineated because we know so many more things about beyond the provings, the chemical composition, the habitat, the behavior of the plants, etc., etc. And all these components together make or compose a picture. of a family?
You know, I think back in my early days in homeopathy, and there was such an anti-conventional medicine bias, I think it still exists, that anything to do with medicine or pharmacology or chemicals or medications in the conventional sense was really rejected out of hand. We were homeopaths. We dealt with dynamic potencies, and we did with provings that there was really no link between what the substance had in it as far as chemicals, what the substance, let's say digoxin or other plants that were made into pharmaceutical medications. All of that was rejected. That was their thing, and our homeopathy had to do with something else entirely. I had no relationship to that. And that was the premise on which those my early days were built on. But that's actually not true at all. That if a plant has a certain chemical in it, like the foxglove, where we get digitalis, or opium, the plant that has morphine derivatives in it, or the solanaceae that have atropine and these things, of course these chemicals are going to have an effect. And we see that. We see that in the provings. And so one of the things that I'm happy to see in homeopathy in general, and we are elaborating that in our plant book, is to build back those bridges and see that there is a wealth of information to be obtained that's homeopathically useful from the pharmacology, from the way the plant lives, or the herbal uses of it in the past, or the poisoning effects. And we're not a separate, distinct thing that has no connections to that botany and that pharmacology.
So that means that if we know one side of a particular substance, let's say the pharmacological side or the chemical side, we know that, then we can draw certain conclusions which are rather solid, instead of having to wait on a proving one day to happen, or maybe someday someone is happy enough to find a clinical case of an unknown remedy so that it can be added to our materia medica. We can be ahead of that process by studying the substances from a non-homeopathic point of view first, and from there draw up a framework or come to certain conclusions which we test out in the clinical practice, or compare these data that we find with what we know homeopathically.
So if we could...
want to give some examples of those.
We've got a couple of people asking some questions, Frans. Just looking at where this information has come from, the non-homeopathic information you're drawing on. You were mentioning the example of Alan using the theories that were around at that time in homeopathy. Yes. Where have you gone to get this information from that's outside of what we've classically talked about in homeopathy?
Where we get our information from? Well, you can have a look in our house and you will see that we have 6 rooms, and 5 rooms are
libraries.
So we have a lot of books, and we use all kinds of books to find information about substances that we use in homeopathy, or families that we use in homeopathy. Chemical books, biology books, nature books, zoology books, whatever is handy in this we use.
Think about the identity or the consciousness of a particular plant or animal. It's what that consciousness or energy form does when it's in a remedy is not going to be different than what it does in that animal or in that plant. So that it's a type of very elegant or more sophisticated, refined idea of the doctrine of signatures in a way, but it's not really that superficial. It's the deep consciousness of that plant or that animal expresses itself in the formation of that living plant or living animal on this earth, and that same force is what then is captured into the remedy. So of course it's going to have the same actions. So someone who studies an animal from a zoological or habitat or behavioral standpoint or anatomic standpoint is going to yield information for us, because that is also part and parcel of the very essence core of that living being. So we read books about plants, or people who've studied plants, or look at the pharmacological side of it. What has this plant been known to do in the past in other contexts? So there's almost too much information. Our hardest point was to limit what we would write about because the sources were legion.
So it starts all out with the largest unit you can think of, and that becomes smaller and smaller because certain elements will be present in certain members of that large initial unit and not in others. For instance, let's take the cat family. Now, out of the cat family, there are only 4 species that can roar. And there is only one that is social, that lives in groups, which is the lion. The others don't. So you start at the top, where they are all cats. And that's what they share with each other. There are certain properties or certain qualities which they share. And then down the line, they specify into the species that they are.
Didn't you mean to say down the lion?
Yeah, down the line. Right? Right? And so it is with plants. It's exactly the same. Only we use other parameters and we use other information to gather that unit information first. That we have to do. What we have done so far in homeopathy, we have concluded the unit information from the species, but we have to start at the top first and then work our way down. We have worked our way up from a number of species, assuming because there are more in that unit that they will be the same as the one that we know, like the well-known example of the arnica, like all remedies in the Asteraceae, the family of arnica, apparently have something to do with wounding, which is dubious, but that's what we assume.
Maybe again, it's like addressing an envelope. First, the post office doesn't look at the name of the person. It starts with what country is this, and then what state or province is this, and then what city is this. We start from the largest and then work down more to the specific. And the impact on prescribing is nothing short of wonderful. I mean, that's what this is primarily all about. We enjoy the intellectual exercise, certainly, but the bottom line is this make our prescribing more accurate and helping our patients more? And I would have to say absolutely. So maybe you had another question, Greg?
Yeah, well, I'm just wondering if maybe if we talk about how you apply that in the practice. I mean, my first thought is, so does that mean the step one for you, we're going back to the post office, and is step one you're deciding this is plant kingdom, or are you starting at a different level than that?
I think I try not to do it in that regard. What I try to do is to see, if I start that way, it's a little biased. I think that for me, as the case unfolds and I start seeing certain qualities, the family level occurs to me or seems to present itself to me more. For example, instead of saying, okay, this is an animal, now is this a mammal or a spider or a snake, it's more that the qualities of spider would present themselves first, or that would be the most apparent. So the first cut I usually see in practice is at the family level. So it would be not, okay, I've got a plant here. These are my plant qualities that this patient has presented. Now I have to determine what plant family. It's not, that's not usually how it works for me. That's the patient usually comes out with something that's more a little bit down. So my post office analogy breaks down at that point because we're going to a little bit. But I think other homeopaths may have a different experience from that. But that's how it usually occurs. So then once I see that there's a family, one of the problems I think that are a trap that we can fall into is we think of animals as competitive, me versus them, and we think of plants as sensitivity, and then we think of structure for minerals. And that's an excellent division and extremely helpful, but you have a very sensitive natrum muriaticum, so unless you're extremely careful to make sure that you're not being going too hasty and saying, oh, this patient's very sensitive, I'm going to go to the plant family, because you also have plants that are extremely competitive. And so if you see something where there's a lot of competition and a lot of me versus them, you could still be in the plant family. So these larger divisions, I think that you could get off on the wrong foot very easily. Now, other homeopaths don't find that to be true, but that's been my experience. So it's the next level that tends to present itself a little bit more clearly in the interview.
And so when you're looking at that, the plants and the families, you've got those 139 groups of families there, and that's coming from the APG3 plant system. So, yeah, so it's based on genetic testing of the plant.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
that guarantees that the chemical composition of these various members that have been reallocated here and there, so placed in other groupings or the other families, is much more to rely on, as in the past it was not. Because these were based on external characteristics and features, like the number of petals or the color of the flowers or the shape of the leaves or something like that. And that, of course, is not a guarantee at all that the chemical composition is in line with each other. And two white-flowered plants do not necessarily have the same chemicals. But with this genetic outlining, there is much more similarity in the chemical composition, and therefore we can know that the effects must be very similar too.
And it's the chemical composition that has more of an impact on what the proving symptoms are going to be or what it's been used as medicinally, so as opposed to the external morphology. So whereas that has importance, I think this has been a refining quality. And if you're going to use plant family divisions or these groupings, that botanical groupings, if you're going to rely on that, then it better be sure that they're accurate, so that you see the remedies in there, and you're going to assign them or paint them with the themes of that whole family. It has to be accurate. So the more precision, and as we homeopaths are developed and we walk hand in hand with the botanical developments, we've helped each other become more accurate. So we, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I've got just a question with someone is asking, with the individual species, when we're looking at medicines, that one version of the medicine may be made from the whole plant, another one just from the leaves, another just from the roots. Do you see variety in the symptoms based on the different parts of plants, which presumably have different balance of those alkaloids within them?
The pharmacologist and the pharmacist, it's their task to find out which part of the plant contains most of the active ingredients, so to speak, that can differ, but it doesn't differ per species, but it may differ per within a genus or something like that. The root might be more active. For instance, an example is the story of the arnica fly. Did I ever tell you that story about the arnica fly?
No, I've not heard that one.
Well, there's a story about the arnica fly, and that came from Herring. And Herring said, we shouldn't use the flowers of arnica to make our medicine from, our medicine arnica, because it contains always standard an arnica fly, which feeds on the ovaries of the female part. And he is right, it's there. And he says that affects the remedy picture that we get, because we get some Cantaris type of effects, because it's an insect that sits there. So it came about that was the idea, that what the reason was why certain symptoms were there in arnica, and these should be avoided or should be separated from the arnica fly. Now it turns out that this is not the case at all. This arnica fly doesn't affect it. It's the chemicals of arnica that are most active ingredients that sit in the flowers. And they cause these effects that Herring thought that were caused by the arnica fly. For instance, by external application of arnica ointment, it is said that you get certain skin eruptions. And it is believed that it has something to do with an arnica fly, as Herring said. This is not the case. These are the chemicals that sit in the flower.
So it's really an interesting question, because whereas with animals, for example, the question of, do the melts have certain qualities that are different than the same animal have a remedy made out of the blood? And the Jonathan Shore did a set of provings where he took a bird and took blood, feather, and shavings from the beak, and did 3 different remedy preparations from those 3 parts of the same animal. and did provings. And because the blood has certain constituents that the feathers don't and so forth. And the result was that they were the same. Mm-hmm. So from an animal, that's the case. Now, from a plant, I don't think it's been done. And it would be quite interesting since in some cases there's like the Euphorbiaceae has a very toxic latex that's in the seams of the plant, but it's not in other parts of the plant. I suspect that they still would be the same because we're still dealing with the energy substance of that individual plant, and that may supersede the difference in the presence of levels of phytochemicals at certain parts of the other. But I'm not sure. It would be something that would be a very interesting project to do, because that would, if we don't have, as if we didn't have enough trouble finding one remedy from another, now we would have to say, is this remedy from this part of that plant or the other part of that plant?
You may assume that certain chemicals have a tendency to accumulate more in certain parts of the plants more than others for certain reasons, because many of these chemicals are defense chemicals to defend themselves against herbivores, against being eaten or consumed. So in certain plants it will be sitting in the seeds because the seeds need to be protected against seed eaters, and so on and so on. To be always on the safe side, we just take the whole plant. It's easy as that, then we have it all.
Yeah. Yeah, I always have a bit of a giggle to myself at the materia medica for dolphin's milk. You know, one of the delusions is that they're looking through a piece of glass, which is always quite peculiar when you think about the milks come from a captive dolphin who's essentially living in a fish tank. I wonder if it was a different dolphin, would you have that symptom or not?
Well, there are no doubt symptoms that sneak into the materia medica that have nothing to do with the source, but are an idiosyncratic product of the prover.
Yes.
No doubt.
Well, one of the things we thought would be, were there any other questions at this point?
I think we can move on at the moment.
Okay. Well, one of the things we wanted to just briefly mention is just to give you a very shortened thumbnail sketch of one family, which is kind of known to people. It's the Umbelliferae, which is now called the Apiaceae. And it's a family that Frans is going to introduce, and then I'll talk about some of the clinical sides of it.
It's botanically, it's a huge family, the carrot family it's called in common language. It has close to 4,000 species. In homeopathy it's actually also rather large, but we only use a number of the members, although we have 70 remedies mentioned for this family. We generally use only Conium, Etusa, and perhaps Cicuta and Onatera and a couple of others. Now, what we can say about this family in terms of chemical composition, there are three groupings to be made. There is a grouping that relates to condiments and herbs and spices, like fennel and dill and caraway and that kind of plants. There is a grouping that has resin, like the Asafoetida and like Sumbul, which are species of Ferula. And there are very toxic species which affect the central nervous system, like Conium and Cicuta and Onatera and Etusa to a certain extent. So that's the division we can make within the grouping. It will be difficult to consider them a very solid grouping all the same. Well, of course, to a certain extent they are, but we quickly can narrow it down to groupings within the grouping. Now, what is remarkable about them is the fact that if you go out on the field and try to recognize an umbellifera, a member of this family on the species level, you really, really need to be an expert. That's very difficult. You can recognize an umbellifera and you can say this is an umbellifera because it is not a lily, or it is not a fern, or it is not that, or it is not this. But to recognize within the family what species or what genus you're talking about is very difficult. They all look alike. Botanists call it something of a disaster area because this is known in botany as well too. The colors are usually either white or yellow. There's hardly any variation in that. The flower structure or the inflorescence structure is very similar. It's a sort of reversed umbrella with smaller and smaller flowers radiating outwards. The places where they grow are usually the same. And then there is another curious fact about them. You cannot cross them. They are very difficult to create hybrids from this family. That means one way or another, in spite of the fact they all look alike, they retain their individuality because you cannot cross them with another individual to make a third individual. It doesn't work. So even scientific attempts to encourage some variety are staunchly resisted by the members of this family. This causes serious problems in breeding programs. For instance, you might want to have a cross of a parsnip and a carrot. Let's suppose that you want to do that. In other families, you can make all kinds of fruit crosses and create new fruit. You cannot do that in this family. So they resist being improved, they resist being manipulated, they don't change, they keep to themselves, they conserve their own. These are conclusions that you can draw from botany and from breeding programs. This is what it tells us something about this family, and it would be interesting to find out whether there is in the homeopathic view something that reflects this. Now, then there's one other interesting thing. Of course, there are a number of themes, and these all together contribute to the idea of a plant family. Another thing is that, and you can find examples in the homeopathic literature plentiful, that is, they are easily confused because they all look alike, but they all taste alike, more or less. Under parsnip, for instance, you can find it in Allen. Under parsnip, you will find intoxications, central nervous system, neurological symptoms developing after eating of parsnip. This is not possible. This is confusion of identity. This is confusion of species. They didn't know that they were eating something else, but thought they had a parsnip. So it is with Etusa. It's called something like wild parsley or something like that, or a variety of dog's parsley, I believe it's called. It's only good for the dogs, but it's not parsley, but it resembles like parsley. So this idea of, is this my friend or is this my foe? Is this my enemy or can I deal with this person, yes or no? You can't tell.
So when we look at, take those botanical features where we have this monoculture. They only breed within themselves. Even with the best efforts, they won't crossbreed. They have a lot of similarity in appearance, and yet some are flavorful. They're used in foods, and some are highly toxic and poisonous, but you can't necessarily tell one from the other. So how does someone know if you're eating a parsnip or you're eating conium, the water hemlock? So these are things that we see in the botany, and the habit of the plants represent themselves very clearly in the themes that we see in the family. So, for example, on the idea of being insular, being only to yourself, not wanting to go outside, not wanting to mix with any other species outside yourself, we have rubrics that represent those things on a human level of what's being demonstrated on the botanical level. So, for example, many of these these remedies are found in the following rubrics: aversion to company, difficulty to trust others, desires to go to a peaceful place away from people, contempt and scorn for mankind. He withdrew himself into solitude, dreams, desires to go home. Aversion to being near people and to talk with those passing, wants to grab and abuse them. Aversion to people. Isolating himself from people. So these are how a human would express that same quality. So if we look, there's many other clues in the cases and materia medica that I don't have time to elaborate, but taking all those things together, putting all the factors together, we come up with a conundrum, a conflict, or a state of being that people in this plant, members of this plant family, have. And that is that they tend to be highly conservative, insular, structured, and bent towards conformity. They prefer their own kind, maintaining a shared identity. They want the status quo. And they don't like strangers, new environments, and they're very difficult to adapt to any changes. So they want to keep everything the same and avoid any strangers for protection, because the world is really kind of a dangerous place out there. There can be sudden poisonings. There can be people who aren't what they seem. They may look friendly, but underneath they may be poisonous. So those strangers with dangers can resemble those family members. In fact, so close can this resemblance between friend and foe, or danger and safety, that it's easy to make a mistake. So by that resulting in serious harm. So because of that, because identity is so critical, they become more and more careful to avoid any hint of anything outside themselves, anything that's quite different than themselves. So they maintain a monotonous uniformity to enable them to detect even the smallest variations, which would alert themselves to the presence of a stranger who might pose a possible threat. So the idea of threat is very well in this plant family, also because some of the members are so highly poisonous. And even the unsuspecting scavenger for food can go and take the bite out of the wrong piece, and instead of a good meal, they get poisoned. So they achieve this level of protection. It sounds logical, it sounds effective, but there's really a high price. Because when you're insular and when you don't interchange with people outside yourself, then you become stagnated, monoculture, and there's a drop in the plants. In fact, there's a drop in reproduction, and there's not enough genetic variation to maintain the quality of the plant family itself. So to survive and even thrive, on one hand, they have to stay insular and monoculture, but they pay the price for that by being stagnated. So, and having a less vigorous and viable family, having less interaction with other people. But if they want to get that interaction with other people, then they might expose themselves to risk. So that's the conundrum, the catch-22 that every member of this family gets caught in.
So, if you would look for the materia medica confirmation of the points that we make here, you will automatically go to the largest species, which is Cornea, has most symptoms, for instance, but it may not have the full spectrum of all the things that Linda mentioned. But that needs to be filled in with the rest of the information that you gather from other sources and you count together. But Cornea, for instance, has narrow-minded, it has dogmatic, it has superstitious. These symptoms are the unit symptoms are most likely found under its largest member, because remember, the largest member represents the unit, not itself only. It's not a species, it's the group head, it's the prototype. We call it the type remedy. So there are two ways how you can get to it. The moment you enter your repertory and your materia medica, and you end up concluding that your case needs a type remedy, stop there. Don't do this. Look further what more there is in this group of which it is the type remedy, and make then your comparison and make then your choice.
Well, another thing to mention about that's quite interesting is that this family also has many estrogen type effects, and they can have menstrual difficulties, gynecological manifestations, miscarriages, and difficulty with lactation. And so we know, for example, with aphthusa, one of the characteristic symptoms is the child doesn't like the mother's milk. Again, that idea of being separated or not being sure, is this a friend or a foe, it even occurs with their own children. So miscarriage or having an aversion to family members, that can occur so that the circle of accepted members becomes smaller and smaller and smaller. So one of the things we do with every plant family is we elaborate these ideas drawing upon the botany, the provings, the phytochemicals, and take all of it together and then ask the question, how is this energy surviving? Where is the conflict or the conundrum, the catch-22, the two opposing forces within that being that's creating the conflict? And in every plant family has this kind of thing where, as in this family, it's on one side being afraid of sudden danger and sudden attacks, so you have to become more and more insular, more and more of a monoculture. But then on the other hand, you become isolated and stagnated, and you can't have any genetic variation or any interaction with other people. That's part of the conflict, and it's expressed in every single symptom and every single aspect of what this family is about.
And we start from the top. We discuss the family from the top. First, the things that go for the family. That is its chemical composition, its habitat, its behavior, what people think about them, what they have used them for, and all the things that you can find. After that, we come to certain conclusions. This may present itself such and so, or like this and that in patients. And then after that, we alphabetically discuss all the members in that family, all of them. Whether they have symptoms or no symptoms, all of them will be discussed. And sometimes that's very complicated. Like plants from Madagascar, we hardly know anything about them. But we have to do our best, they are there, so we mention them. We say from Madagascar, this is how they look and this is what we can find about them. But we know they must be similar to the ones we know because they are in the same botanical family.
And so if you come to the idea, okay, I see that family theme in this patient, then you can look through each family member and say, I'm not going to just limit myself to Ethusa or the ones that I know. You can go and read, and then there might be one symptom or one little peculiar individual characteristic in your patient that then helps you find that specific family member that is going to address that. And there are many times that through these ideas I've found remedies that were more precise and more exacting to the patient. For example, a case that was Solanacea that looked for all the world like stramonium, but what actually it was Solanum nigra. It was a much more precise prescription because whereas the reason it looked like stramonium is because of the qualities of the family, not because it was individual to stramonium. But the little individual peculiar qualities of Solanum nigra were much more accurate. And that's the template of how to use this information.
And that can be only one thing, but it must be specific. Maybe two things, that's it. Because the rest of it fits in the unit. So on that basis you cannot make a selection of a species. The selection of the species is done on unique symptoms. And unique symptoms are never with many. There's only a few of them.
So in the time left, maybe we'd like to tell you a little bit about one of the other projects we're working on.
Yeah, please.
Two other projects coming up. They're both in purple. The first one is I've redone the concordant. The concordant is meant to summarize or to capture everything from the classical materia medica that is available. Now at a certain point we understood that in the classical materia medica there is a lot of repetition. They just copy from each other. The original sources are the provings or the clinical cases or the intoxications. Now, the original concordant was based mainly by and large on hearing. And hearing was imitated by others who just copied parts from him and put it in a book under their own name. One of them being Burke. So that resulted in that there was a certain accent, a certain emphasis in the concordant which I wanted to change. That is, hearing is mainly clinical. It is not so much proving. That means these symptoms are cured. These are cured symptoms. Cured symptoms have the tendency to be more objective. Caused symptoms, by provings or intoxications, have more the tendency to be subjective sensation, as if a dream, a feeling, a delusion, things. They are not so common in clinical cases. Therefore, the emphasis in the old concordant is more on the objective side, and it is lacking a bit of the subjective side. I wanted to address that problem, so I've added Allen, T.F. Allen, 10 volumes of encyclopedia, also in the handbook by Allen, on which he selected what he really, really trusted from his 10 volumes. That has changed the emphasis. The emphasis is now much more on the mind section has been enlarged, the dream section has been enlarged, the sensation section has been enlarged. So I think that in the new concordant, which we call concordant reference, the balance is better.
Fantastic.
That is one. Second is the number of remedies have been enlarged. Formerly there were about 850. In the old concordant there are now more than 1,200. All either having their own section or easily findable. Some of them have only one word or two words. They come from Böreke. Böreke has in general most remedies mentioned, but he is not a deep goer. His symptoms are not deep, they're wide. So he was collecting material in his days. That means there are things that we probably never going to use, but it still is handy to know that they are there. So the number of remedies have been included, and the balance of the book has been changed, and all the remedies which in the past concordant, the old concordant, were based on the names given in Clark, which were the common names, have been how do I say that, have been checked on their accuracy and have been placed in Latin first, the Latin name now first, then the common name, then the grouping or the family, which was not there in the old concordant, but by now that becomes an important thing to know where a remedy is categorized, where it's classed, where it belongs. So I have done all that. Then I have made the formulas of all the chemical remedies. A muriaticum is a chloride. But we need to know how the composition is. We need to know of certain chemical remedies that they have a component of sulfur, or a component of nitrogen, or a component of phosphor. We can only see that from the formula. So I've placed the formulas there, so you can draw your own conclusions to a certain extent where to categorize them. Partly also the chemicals. What have I done more?
So it really, even though this book is all the classic materia medica in one volume, so it draws upon these cured and caused symptoms from before, it's updated for our modern usage. By adding these features, this information and the knowledge of the remedies, that it places them firmly in our modern way of thinking, and so it's the foundation of the classic materia medica with the categorizations and the updating the names and making things more accurate for things that have improved and elaborated since their time.
The classic materia medica came about from, say, Hahnemann, of course. Hahnemann was the first who started the materia medica, the homeopathic materia medica, 1790, and the classic materia medica more or less ended or went into a sort of dormancy around 1930. Clark being the last well-known name of the traditional classic materia medica. So my intention was, in the concordant reference, as it is called now, it will be published by Archibald, B.J. and Archibald, my intention was to capture the classic materia medica as complete as I could get it in one cover. So it's now 2,100 pages, and that's it. I think I have them all. Here, of course, I will have overlooked some article in some journal which is not mentioned there, but by and large, I have the classic authors: Clark, T.F. Allen, Börke, Copperthwaite, Boker, Lippe, and Herring, if I didn't forget him, Kent, Pulford. I have them all included, and I think it covers the ground.
Yeah. Interesting.
We have to really thank B.J. Archibald, the publishers, who've done such a fantastic job working with us and getting the books. It's a beautiful book. The paper quality is great. It's a
Purple.
Well, the paper's not purple. The cover's purple. But they've done a marvelous job. It's a tremendous volume of information, and they package it in a way that's going to be easy to use.
And then you said that the plant book's coming out in the coming few weeks. How long do you think until the concordant reference becomes available?
We're shooting for a month, in about 4 weeks.
Wow. Wow.
So they're both be about the same time. So the plant book published by Saltier Publishers, where you can look for that about the end of October, and they have a website, saltierbooks.com, and someone can register, so they will send an email when the book is available. And B.J. and Archibald with Archibald Opus, and there will be an electronic version of this available for the Radar Opus, and they are going to get this out on the market in about a month.
Yeah, and there will be a website called Plant Families where we can update our latest material, we can make additions, etc. So, because botany never stands still, there are new plants being introduced in homeopathy, we need to know where they belong, so we can give them their place and we can compare them with what we know.
And on the plantfamilies.com, it's going to be up in the next few days or a few weeks. There will be the whole index of the plant book, all 2,000 some odd remedies, as well as where each of those plant, what family it belongs to. So there'll be a lot of resources about the book on that website.
I have a question here from one of the audience members, just wondering, with the work that you've been doing, especially on the plants, but just in general, of course, anytime someone publishes a book, they focus on the areas which are first and of most interest to them. Just wondering, next step perhaps for version 2 of the plant book in 20 years' time, will be, is there other areas you can focus on?
Yeah,
what direction
in 20 years' time, 20 years' time, I would say, we will have just barely recovered from writing the first one.
Yeah.
Well, Frans is he's a never-ending source of creativity. It's just amazing to watch. The next book after Concordant is a synoptic reference, and that's an exciting project. Probably see that in February of next year. And then, of course, as in the same vein as the plant books, there's going to be animals and, of course, minerals.
And then the whole animal kingdom we want to have in there. Not split up in various versions, but just like the plant book, the spiders all together with the snakes, etc. And there is much more than what we know of. There is much more available in the pharmacies which we don't use. But it's just a matter, as always, just like in the plants. First, we need to know where it belongs. We need to know with what to compare it, and then we can start using it. Now we don't do that because we right away try to go for a species that we know, and we forget about the related ones. So it is in animals. We have 95 snakes available from the pharmacies. How many do we use? Maybe 5, 6, 7, maybe 10?
So a lot of exciting things coming up. We can hardly know what to work on next.
Yeah, it's so inspiring hearing all the work that you're doing on. I know, Frans's book has been, for most of us, the book that we turn to first in our clinics, and hearing the kind of things that are coming up in the future is incredibly exciting. I guess I'd like to thank you both very much for your time today. It's been really great to hear from you, and and get a bit of an insight into the work that you've been doing and the work that you're no doubt going to be doing for at least another 20 years and probably another 50 years it might take you to finish that, it sounds like.
Is everyone looking at the same picture? Is everyone looking at these ferns, or are they these Australian ones? These,
yes.
Are they tree ferns, or are they something else?
I must admit I don't know. You're probably a better expert to say than what I am, but yeah, everyone can see that.
There's another grouping, I forgot the name so quickly, this macrozamia, you call it. You can eat the heart of those, but they are toxic. I forgot the name of those.
Okay.
Never ending, never end. There's so much in the world out there, and we just want to produce resources that help homeopaths in their thinking and their clinic and their understanding of the world and homeopathy so we can help our patients better.
Yeah, great. So thank you both so much for your time today. I guess we look forward to seeing you in Byron Bay in Australia and the last weekend of October, and then first weekend of November in Auckland in New Zealand. Yeah, thanks very much, Frans and Linda. We look forward to talking to you soon.
You're welcome.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye-bye.